I am really excited to be here because I get to help these guys show off the amazing work that they're doing in their district. So the goal of our conversation this afternoon is to hear from Greg and Jen and Shawn, not just about what they're doing, but specifically how they're thinking about quality. Because I think as we move into the future of tutoring, like, we really need to hone in on the different kinds of ways that we think about what quality means and how we showcase that to the folks who are providing funding. The providers in this room I know are thinking deeply about quality, all of this stuff. So what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce each of these folks in turn. They're going to spend just a couple minutes sharing the what of their doing, and then we're going to jump into a conversation. There'll be plenty of opportunity for you all to ask your questions. So I hope this will be engaging, and I'm excited for you to learn from these great folks up here about how they ensure quality and how they plan to sustain and improve high quality, high impact tutoring. So we're going to start with Greg. We are fortunate to have Greg Mott, the Assistant Superintendent of the Poughkeepsie City School District in New York, here today. Greg is an accomplished educator with more than 20 years of educational leadership. His philosophical approach to student success centers on whole group, personalized, and individualized instruction. Before joining Poughkeepsie, Greg was awarded the Outstanding Citizen of the Year for Leadership in Education from the Buffalo City School District. Greg, I'm multitasking. I'm in charge of the slides, so if they don't advance correctly, that's on me, not on them. Greg, can you tell us for just a couple minutes, how is Poughkeepsie approaching tutoring?
I'd like to contextualize. Thank you so much for the introduction. I like to wow myself on that one. That was great. The work is so important, but I'm concluding my 4th year in Poughkeepsie, and I want to contextualize what you're seeing on the screen that led to high impact tutoring that we're concluding our 1st year with. We are concluding year 3 of a vertically aligned K-8 ELA and math program. We are also concluding year 2 of a phonics program. Part of the Poughkeepsie City School District strategic plan is early learning. Part of Poughkeepsie City School District, we are a community schools district. Part of that community schools initiative is early learning. And in that grant, which we just was awarded, we actually wrote in high impact tutoring into that grant. And the 3rd tier that I want to speak about before I go into how we're utilizing tutoring is the Poughkeepsie Children's Cabinet, which is a consortium of partners throughout the city of Poughkeepsie and the county, with the focus is on from cradle to career. Well, again, early learning is a part of that. So that leads to high impact tutoring and tutoring in general that we're concluding in the district. So we've hired 20 tutors. It's part of our instructional day. It's part of the fabric of our day. It's 30 minutes a day, so we have consistency. We have the same tutors that are in the classroom. It's a combination of in-class tutoring, pull-out tutoring. We have a full-time instructional coach that we've hired, and her task is really to work, coach, monitor, analyze data, ensure that the teachers don't have any questions, address those questions, and then report back to my weekly division of instruction meeting how well the tutoring is going. So that's how we currently are utilizing the program. We focus on early literacy in pre-K and K-3 mathematics. So we have 20 tutors working in the classroom with teachers on providing tutoring. And again, it's part of the master schedule, part of the day, because we do and have found, and I have found, that the personal relationships that the tutors establish with the individual students really makes a difference. And we've talked about that. We've heard that all day today. And as I was sharing with some colleagues, it's actually good to hear some of the best practices that were implemented is supported now by some of the research that you all have shared with us today. So I really appreciate that. So that's where we are right now. We're servicing about 270 students, again, pre-K to 3. It's our focus, again, is on early literacy. And most of our tutors come from the community. And that was one of the key parts of our partnership with the company we selected to support us in this endeavor, that we wanted graduating high school students, we wanted parents, we wanted students that were in the community. So we have a small city school district, we're about 4 square miles. So if you went into a local grocery store, you may see your tutor and you can start having those conversations. And we know that those connections between achievement, relationship, attendance, all of which we spoke about, plays a vital part. So that's where we are now, and I'll address more specific questions moving forward.
Thank you so much. It's like hard to restrain all the questions I already want to ask you, but we're going to go to Jen. Okay, Jen is the Deputy Chief of Schools for the District of Columbia Public Schools. She began her career as a teacher at DCPS. She has also done many amazing things. She was the Director of Instruction and Performance for the Office of Early Childhood Education in New York City. She was a founding school leader and network leader at KIPP DC. She is driving DCPS's strategy for accelerating student learning in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I think she might be in the running for like most frequent tutoring panel person at all of these tutoring events everywhere. She's amazing. Jen, hi. Why don't you tell us a little bit about, nope, you're not Poughkeepsie.
I'm not Poughkeepsie. I'm DCPS, I can start.
Sure. I'll get there eventually.
We have been doing tutoring for several years now. We had some small-scale tutoring happening pre-pandemic, but really scaled up alongside so many of you all during COVID and after COVID. I want to note just quickly on the demographics, we are one of the districts that has actually been growing in enrollment over the past couple of years, which is very exciting. We were just under 50,000 students a couple years ago. We've topped 51,000 this year. And I think when we look at where we are in terms of achievement, we clearly have room to grow. I think like so many districts across the country, really seeing a need in math, and we can talk a little bit more about that later. Our students are currently taking their end-of-year assessments. We're optimistic, based on looking at mid-year formative assessments, that students are across the board mostly back to where they were pre-pandemic, which again is not where we want to be. We still have plenty more to do, but we're feeling really optimistic that we're closing some of that ground and able to look forward. So we can go to the next one. Tutoring's been a part of our acceleration strategy. We have, in DCPS, I think, very deeply hold the belief that our schools know their students, they know their families, they know their staff best. I work at Central Services, our central office. Like, we have 117 schools. I don't know the ins and outs of every single one of those buildings. What I know, what my team knows, is we know the research backing behind tutoring. We know what the quality standards are, what needs to be in place. And so we really work to empower our schools to understand those quality standards, mesh that with what their community has and needs, and figure out a tutoring approach that works for them. So we have tutoring happening during the day. We have it after school. We have it with staff, with partners. We have a variety of different models based on schools and their needs. Last year, we served about 7,000 students. We're on track to probably serve that, if not slightly more, for this year. So it's about 14% of our students. I will also say one of the things I think that's really unique about the work that we've been doing in DC, and I think you heard Dr. Grant talk about it a little bit this morning, is that we are not doing this alone as the LEA. We are clearly working incredibly hard on it, but we have the support from our Office of the State Superintendent for Education. All of those folks are here. We have the support from City Tutor. I've lost where Kat went, but they help provide some technical assistance for our schools and our partners. They also provide funding. So I think we have this really strong ecosystem of support that has made the work that we're doing even stronger, and I think will ultimately be more sustainable. So I'll leave it there, and we can talk more about questions later.
Awesome. Okay. Now we're going to go to Shawn. Shawn is the Student Success Coordinator for Lenoir City Schools, which if you don't know, because I'm deeply familiar with Tennessee, it's about 15 minutes outside Knoxville. I've just been learning about it from Shawn, who is from Knoxville originally, and before he was at Lenoir City, he was a teacher in Knox County, and then, which is like music to my data-driven heart, he said to me just earlier, he goes, and then I just had this crazy idea, like maybe I should do sort of data and accountability things for Lenoir City, and they've hung many hats on his head at Lenoir City, and one of them, of course, is working on their district-wide tutoring, and we're excited to learn about what you're doing right now.
Awesome. Thanks, Liz. Excuse me. So our work started out from our superintendent, Dr. Jeannie Barker. She started out right after the pandemic, I can't remember who spoke about it earlier this morning, in Algebra 1 at our high school. We saw a need there, and from our work at our high school, we were like, man, there's something to this, something to meeting kids where they're at in a small group environment. And then the state of Tennessee came in and partnered with our local districts to say, hey, like what about this early literacy piece? So in Lenoir City Schools, we started in the fall of 21 with 6 tutors, 4 ELA, 2 math in our elementary school grades. We started out in first grade. We had about 36 kids total that went through this program. And what we came to find out was, one, there was academic success. We saw that the peers that were at a similar level to those that were not in tutoring had more growth academically, but we also had all these social emotional pieces that just blew us away. From like one conversation, like all kids want to feel known. I'm a big supporter of making sure the kids in our district feel known and have a place. And so we had a kid that came and they were kind of a kid that would just go under the radar. They weren't the lowest student, they weren't the highest student. And through this, they found a relationship with the tutor that they were able to tell them, like, hey, it's going to be really cold tonight, and I don't have a blanket. Like, I don't have something to keep me warm. And we saw a ton of conversations that were fruitful, that were similar to that, come from this relationship between a tutor and their students. So we started small, 1 to 3 in the school day. It was in our skills block that partnered up with ELA and math. And from there, the next year, we jumped out to say, okay, let's get creative here. How could we make this something that every kid could somehow take advantage of? So we did some strategic scheduling, partnered with our intervention block. On the screen, you see Power Up. We call it Power Up. But basically, we have this support of tutors that can come in at a 1 to 3 ratio in ELA and math. We're up to about 18 now. We service about 300 students just within our Power Up scheme of tutoring. But we also, because we have the tutors that enter this 1 hour block, are able to take our teachers, our RTI interventionists, ESL interventionists, SPED interventionists, and get all our groups within our elementary school to about a 1 in 5 ratio that are outside of this 1 in 3 tutoring time. And from there, we've kind of seen a really awesome opportunity for kids to feel known, feel heard. From our surveys with our teachers, we've seen that the kind of the quality of the connectedness within the classroom, how engaged the students are, the student voice. For students that weren't talking before, we're seeing that now in our classes. And it's created a school culture opportunity that's been really beneficial for all. So I have a lot more to say, but that's kind of the story so far. But we're all in with the tutoring initiative in our district, and we're excited to see where it goes.
Awesome. All right, so now we're going to jump into the meat, which is this conversation about quality and what quality means. And I was thinking about this in the session earlier. Beth Schuler, if I'm saying your name correctly, but she was making this point that like we know a lot about the impact of tutoring, but not as much about the individual impact of like different design features. So I think like our conversation is going to dig into a little bit of what you guys are seeing and thinking. And the first one I want to ask you about is high quality materials. Mm-hmm. How do you think about like what does it mean for tutors to be working with high quality materials in your district, and how do you make sure that that's what's happening? Shawn?
We talked about instructional coherence this morning. Someone was on the stage talking about coherence. I'm sorry that I forgot the name of the person that was talking about it. But with that being said, we take our Tier 1 materials, our high quality instructional materials, and we try to make sure that our tutoring curriculum is front-loading what we're seeing in our Tier 1 setting. To be honest with you, for ELA, it's taken a lot of work. We have an instructional coach in our small district that has taken on that load. and built out these materials. The state of Tennessee for K2 has a foundational skills curriculum that we can utilize to make this coherence occur. And then we take the supplemental material from our high quality instructional materials for 3rd through 5th grade to keep that in line. But it's been a lot of work for ELA. I've been encouraged from hearing what resources are out there and what other people in this room are doing. For math, we utilize Zern. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with Zern. It provides a platform that allows us a little bit more flexibility. But yeah, that's what we're doing right now.
Yeah. How does that compare, Jen, to like in a much bigger district? Like you have probably maybe a broader array of materials that are in use to begin with. So how does this fit in with how you guys think about high quality instructional materials?
Yeah, I mean, building on what Shawn was saying, we definitely focus on the alignment with Tier 1, right? People have said it at various points throughout today. We want to make sure that students are getting access to instruction during tutoring that's going to help them access that Tier 1 instruction and be aligned. We don't need to add confusion into the mix. So that's our baseline. But from there, yes, we're bigger, and so we have a much more diverse array of instructional materials that we're using during tutoring. It also, we've been very intentional about trying to match materials, not just with alignment with Tier 1, but with who's doing the tutoring, right? So if it's your classroom teacher who's doing the tutoring, they're going to be able to much more easily sort of adapt the instructional resources that they're using in class because they're a trained teacher and they're familiar with it. Versus if we have college students doing the tutoring, or if we have volunteers or AmeriCorps members, they are likely going to need something more scripted. And so we've been very intentional about reviewing all of our instructional materials. We work incredibly closely with our teaching and learning team and the content experts to make sure that there is alignment in not just the content, but also in the sort of level of scripting and support for the tutor, because we've found that to be incredibly important.
Yeah. Anything to add? I mean, okay, changing the subject a little bit, right? Next, Greg, so you talked a little bit about how your district, you have community schools, you're focused on early learning. When we had our prep call last week, we got into the conversation that I think is really worthwhile for us, which is how do you talk about quality of tutoring within a broader conversation of quality of learning and quality of your schools as we make the case for tutoring to remain, you know, or become part of our long-term strategy? How do we think about the quality of tutoring vis-a-vis that we're doing a good job overall, and how does it fit in with the broader strategy of community schools, of early learning, of these things you're thinking about in Poughkeepsie?
No, that's a great question, and I can appreciate the question. Quality matters. So one of the things in selecting a partner was looking at a crosswalk of the New York State standards as a relationship to servicing pre-K to 3rd grade students in ELA and mathematics. So how do those instructional practices, how does the material, how do the tools that are very important, because we want the language to be the same or closely aligned, what's being taught in the classroom to what's being taught in the tutoring session. In addition to that, like I've already mentioned, we've also hired a full-time instructional coach. That person's job really is modeling, really is looking at the instructional materials, sitting side by side with the tutor in collaboration with the building principal, along with the teachers, to talk about what this material is and how the quality of the tutoring is taking place. We come back to our Division of Instruction meetings and we really look at analyzing the data as we drill down as deep as looking at questions. What questions align to certain standards? What questions align to certain kids who are deficient in a certain particular skill? And how does this align, how this particular work? And we talk about and talk through the steps we need to go through in a tutoring session and how this particular kid, we can scaffold the learning to help him or her get to mastery of that particular skill.
If I could just build on that, Liz, I think I love that question, because one of the things that we've really tried to do in DCPS is build tutoring into our MTSS systems. And as a result of that, or as part of that, we're looking across the board. We're looking at Tier 1. What's happening at Tier 1 for students? Is it working? Do we need to make adjustments? We made some real adjustments to our Tier 1 instructional materials coming back from the pandemic to help build in some of those other foundational skills that students may have missed, because we knew we weren't going to provide tutoring to everybody for all of the, right? We had to be strategic about looking at Tier 1, trying to make sure that was working for the vast majority of kids so that then our tutoring could be much more targeted at the students who had the greatest gaps and who really needed that extra support. I think the other piece of that is that because it's built into our MTSS system, we're looking across attendance, SEL, academics, behavior, when we look holistically at students and think about where they need supports and intervention. Just because a kid is struggling academically doesn't mean tutoring is necessarily the right fit for them right now. They might need a behavior support or an attendance support. Maybe that's combined with tutoring, maybe it's not, but we're really trying to be intentional about that holistic look so that we can be strategic with our resources.
And just before Shawn chimes in, I'm glad she mentioned MTSS, because it is a part of our fabric as well. And again, we have to build it along the way. So that's our next step in building the quality in our tutoring program.
I don't have much more to add from what you guys have said other than, as she said, I love data. So I think you can sit and look, a student's more than just data. So I think that's important to take in mind. And being a small school district, I can get in the classrooms and kind of see, where these fits at. And I know in a larger district, it's harder to do that. But I think in taking teachers' input, taking admin's input and saying, hey, I'm here to help you build this and I'm going to manage the overall program. But I think it's more than just data sometimes with the kids that we're putting these tutors in front of, and taking the feedback from the tutors as well. But yeah, I think that's all I have to add.
Thank you. So diving back in a little bit more to some of the details, I want to talk about the challenge of dosage and the implications it has for running a quality program. How in your districts are you thinking about how are you trying to make sure that students are getting enough sessions of tutoring in order to get that impact? And like what are those sort of what is the strategy, but also kind of how are you thinking about approaching that challenge?
Well, ideally for me, we have 80 minutes of the literacy block and math block as well. And part of that is whole group and small group. And that's where we expect our tutoring to take place, be a part of that small group instruction framework. We actually have mapped out for a teacher what that looks like, depending on the lesson. Some lessons may be 35 minutes using the core instruction, some may be 55. So the tutors have that time within the fabric of our instructional day, along with our academic intervention teachers and the like, to provide, again, 30 minutes of allotted time within the schedule for small group, for individualized instruction, which include tutoring.
I think the biggest lesson we've learned around this, one, you're right, it very much matters. We see it in our data, right? Like we see that students who are getting tutoring at dosage are consistently doing better than those who are not. So I know that this is a room full of researchers, and we've seen that bear out in our data as well. I think the other thing we've learned programmatically is that the more we can incorporate tutoring into something that exists in the schedule, the better. Right? So in some cases, for example, we have a kindergarten math tutoring program happening, thanks to Accelerate, where we have built-in tutoring that paraprofessionals are delivering during the math block. So students already had district-wide a needs-based small group portion of the math block. Most of our kindergarten classrooms have paraprofessionals in them. We have given them a scripted math curriculum to do in groups of up to 4 during that time. It's baked in the schedule, everybody has it. We have other schools, it came up earlier this morning when Dr. Grant was speaking, we have one of our elementary schools that built tutoring into their schedule for all students. It is an all hands on deck situation at this school. There's a morning block for K to 2 and an afternoon block for 3 to 5. Every adult in the building is tutoring during that time. It is baked into the schedule. We've seen success with after school, particularly at our elementary schools, where we have robust after school programming. Students are there. We can do tutoring during those first 30 to 60 minutes of after school because we have that already built into our schedule. So I think the more we have been able to sort of be innovative with that approach, the stronger we've been able to be in terms of consistency. And then we also try to overschedule dosage, right? So if you really need to meet with your math small group 3 times a week, we're going to tell you just do it every day. And then something comes up and you're still fine.
We fall into all hands on deck approach at our elementary school. Our tutors meet with the same students 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday. provide, it scaffolds out of 1 hour blocks from first grade, second grade to third grade. Within that, we've seen a lot of success because you also have that family piece, that relationship piece that can be built over the course of a semester. We do monitor attendance. If I want a seat filled, but I don't automatically, just because a kid missed 2 weeks, pull them. We look at semester attendance and shuffle the numbers from there. At our intermediate middle school, we do 2 45-minute sessions or 3 30-minute sessions, and just the consistency within the tutoring, that's where we've seen the most benefit.
Yep. Yeah. So obviously, one side we've got the student, we're talking about how to get the student there. On the other side is the tutor. Mm-hmm. I think maybe starting with Shawn and Greg, because you guys are both using community folks pretty much exclusively for your tutoring, and I know in DCPS it's more of a mix. But how do you think about making sure that the tutors themselves are actually doing a good job? And I'm particularly thinking about this almost at the school level, because I think as we move forward and we're going to be leaning on school leaders to think about dedicating some of their local budget to tutoring, if you have 5 tutors and one of them is, I just was out of school, right? I was just out of school that had 9 tutors, and they were and 8 of them were great. And the one, you can look at the data, the kids didn't do that well. Which is okay, that happens, and we can roll that up into big averages for the district. But if I'm a principal and I have to dedicate this funding, and how do you think about this issue of, are the tutors doing a good job, and then what do you do about it?
Yeah, that's a great question. That was a lesson learned for us the first year, is making them feel like they're a part of the staff, and also for the teachers. We had a lot of teachers come and say, you have this really cool new shiny object, this cool program you're doing that's getting all these, social media posts, all this, all these shout outs. What about us? We're also doing the work. So from our school leaders' perspective, making sure to integrate this as a part of your, your normal staff directory. We have a tutor tab within the school page. If, for example, beginning of the year, we did a science of reading training for our elementary school. The tutors were there with the teachers. We had already but we'd already listed out the kids they were going to be tutoring based off their spring data. And some of these teachers had relationships with these kids already, and were able to integrate with, this time with conversations, with training. And instead of having to go and meet after you met with your, your school staff and then go meet with your tutors, it was just a mix. Everyone was there and trained as if they were part of the staff, because they were.
It happens. It definitely happens where you're going to have that outlier, that tutor who you select or that is selected to be a tutor who is just not effective at the task. And ultimately, student learning, especially our focus on primary, is very critical to have the proper staff members in place. So you have to have oversight. You have to have sometimes those hard conversations. And if the coaching and the modeling doesn't improve upon the practice for the sake of the students and for even the buy-in from teachers, because that's a big part of that. The teachers need to also believe that the tutors is an asset. It's a support system to the work they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So if you have an outlier that's ineffective at the practice, a decision needs to be made, and more than likely that's a removal.
I'm going to agree with everything these guys have said already, and I think, like you mentioned, Liz, it really is important in DC because we have such a wide variety of tutors and partners, and so it's not, progress monitoring that is not as simple. So I'll say 2 specific things I think are a little bit potentially unique. One, because it's integrated into our MTSS, we are looking at data. Every student who's getting tutoring has a success plan or an intervention plan that is being progress monitored every 6 to 8 weeks. So school teams are looking at progress and seeing if kids are making progress, and if not, then they're able to intervene before it gets too long. I will say the other thing that we've been able to do in DC, which has been wonderful and is in relation to our partnership with OSSE, our state, is that they have funded high-impact tutoring managers in 11 of our highest needs schools. And so these are full-time staff members. They are not full-time tutors. Their charge is to help get the tutoring work at their school up and running in a high-quality way, providing direct feedback to tutors, looking directly at the data, working across partners and staff, and really building strong infrastructure at their school. Those positions were 2-year positions, so most of them will wrap this spring, but because they've known from the jump that their job was both to do tutoring really well at their school for 2 years and work on building sustainability to last beyond them, potentially, in those roles, they've been able to sort of hold those two truths throughout the few years where there are good, strong systems. And we have several schools who've actually dedicated local funds to continue this role. And we have other schools who've said, we've got this. Like, this is a strong system up and running, and we feel confident that we can sustain using existing staff because of the work that this person has put in for this 2-year time. So, yeah.
I think in addition to that, ongoing professional learning is important as well. So we train our teachers and our tutors in the very beginning of the school year with the scripted program that's used, but we also provide time throughout the year, touch points to really make sure that they still are growing their capacity as instructors, as tutors throughout the course of the year. And I think that's very important that you provide them with continuous professional learning opportunities to improve upon their practice.
I mean, Jen, you bring up a great point, which is not strictly about quality, but I don't know if anyone in this room has heard about the ESSER funding cliff. I think we would be remiss to have a panel where we didn't ask you, what are your plans? What have you learned, and what are you thinking about how to fund this important work going forward?
Starting with me?
I mean, I'm looking at you, so go ahead.
Great. Yes, ESSER funding cliff is real. And I mean, I alluded to this when I started. We did have tutoring happening in DCPS pre-COVID. It was smaller, it was much more targeted, it was not for every grade, but it was something that we used our local funds, we used federal funds, we used school improvement funds. Like, we've used a mix of funds in the past. I think what we've been able to do over the past few years with the influx of ESSER dollars is widely expand our tutoring and the types of models that we've used so that schools can figure out what works for them and so that they can be much more intentional. I mean, I'm not going to come up here and say, like, and we have all the same funding moving forward, right? Like, we don't. It's true. But we do still have local and federal dollars that we can put towards this, particularly at the school level, and schools can be much more intentional about how they're using those dollars. We've got, like I mentioned in our kindergarten math work, like, paraprofessionals are in the building already. We used ESSER to buy instructional materials across grade bands to support tutoring. Like, some of those investments will carry us through, and when we can think about innovative ways to use resources that we have, yes, it's still helpful to have additional funding. We will still need additional funding, but there are lots of ways to sort of like blend and braid with what we have already and some additional dollars.
For us, we've had state funding, and we are going to continue to have state funding. There's a few laws out there in our state that provides funding for certain grade levels. But the sustainability piece within our school district is I tried to be a good steward as we were building the program with the funds that we had to create a program that I could present to the board and say, like, hey, like, look, here's what we were able to fund this at, here's what we were given, let's continue this. And I think with local funds and state funds, we're gonna be able to continue doing what we've been doing the last 3 years. We're always going to welcome in additional funds, but I think spending time starting small, finding something that works, and not expanding too rapidly is a good way to start for those that haven't started in this room, and for those that are scaling back, just look at what works, ask questions for those around you. I've enjoyed hearing those in this room of what's working, and go from there. But I think we can continue this work moving forward.
Liz, I also forgot to mention 2 things.
Okay.
So I very much put my DCPS hat on, but one of the things I talked about earlier was we have a very strong coalition across the board, across the city. And so I think the 2 other exciting funding opportunities that we have, one, our state is doing late liquidation with ESSER to create some new contracts with tutoring partners. So those will be able, while the state is taking care of all of the behind the scenes work and establishing the contracts, which we are very grateful for, they will support our schools and our students. So that is one piece. And the other piece is that we were really excited. The last panel, Liz and I were on together. The mayor came to that same event and announced a $4.8 million investment hit for next fiscal year. And so we are very excited about the possibility for those funds and what they can mean for our schools, again, to do that blending and braiding and help sustain the work that we've started.
want to jump in on funding? Or I wanted to, we have about 10 minutes left, and I promised that you'd all get to ask questions.
Good question.
So, I mean, if your first question is, Greg, tell us how you're going to fund tutoring next year, I wouldn't say no, but want to honor that. So is there a mic that's going to get passed around? Okay, we got a mic in the back. Really? Greg, tell us how you're going to keep funding. No. Oh, we've got a question over here. Who is that? Emily Morton.
You've talked, something that just came up in this panel, but it's also come up a lot throughout the day, is scheduling. And I'm wondering, we hear a lot about building it into the school day, but something that doesn't always get coupled with that is like you have to replace something to build it into the school day. And so I'd love to hear what you all replaced. Tutoring, what tutoring replaced, and if only a subset of students are getting tutoring, what are the other students getting while some kids are getting tutoring?
Well, Poughkeepsie is a high-need school district for sure, so we didn't replace anything. We just included that into our literacy block as part of our small instruction period. So we rotate again, so there are times when students are meeting with teachers, sometimes they're meeting with their AIS support staff, and then they're receiving tutoring as well. And so we have selected some of our lower tier 3 students for tutoring. They report out to the classroom teacher, they report out to the coach. We track or we monitor their progress, and that's how we do it in Poughkeepsie, to ensure that every student receives some type of additional support what's being received during whole group instruction.
For us, we had to just look at the master schedule, and we started out with acceleration, tier 1 acceleration, and took a step back to realize that this could also drop down into tier 2 and tier 3 supports. So partnering with that is where we saw change within our master schedule, and then getting super creative with the time that, what is mandatory versus what is optional. I definitely want all my elementary students to go to these enrichment courses, but could we get more unique? Could it be, 3 days instead of 4 days? So working with our admin in the building, there is some sacrifice there, being transparent, but we saw, the benefits of having tutoring, and we thought that way, when we looked at it, it benefited the kids.
One of the things we've been able to do in DC is we work really closely with City Tutor, as I mentioned, and I don't know where Kat went, but they run these, there she is. They run fabulous design sprints for our schools that help them look at the scheduling requirements and the research base behind tutoring and figure out how to make those two things fit. So the elementary school I talked about earlier, they went through a design sprint. The principal basically, blank slate, started her schedule over, shaved 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, and it bought her these blocks, right? We had a middle school that did something very similar where they're able to provide tutoring for all students. We have some schools where they're pushing in during independent practice portion of lessons, right? So we've got a mix of things going on.
More questions?
Hi, from Florida, where we're actually just architecting a tutoring program statewide right now. So my question to you is, if you had the chance to do it over, what would be the one thing you wish you had done different from the start?
That's a great question. For me, it goes back to the teachers. As I was speaking earlier about not hurting feelings, but making people feel like they're not involved. Our teachers, we found after the first year, we thought this was really successful. This was really successful in the data and what we saw from the kids. But we had some buy-in that wasn't necessarily there because they felt left out. And just reminding teachers that they're, hey, you're the major part of this. I like to say it as like a baseball team. You have the head coach, you have a pitching coach, and you have a batting coach. Our tutors are the batting and pitching coach. They're doing some individual work there with the players. And at the end of the day, if the team wins, we're going to celebrate all, but the head coach is going to get the credit here. And trying to remind them is like, you're a large piece of this, this formula. And so going back, that's what I would do at the beginning, is reminding them where you fit in here.
Build the case for why it's needed. Share with them the data, share with them your plan of implementation, how it's value added to the teachers in the classroom, to parents at home, tips, Q&A, pamphlets will be of value, timeline, costs. All these things you have to take into consideration, maybe even take a visit, take a delegation. If you're going to contract with a particular company, you may want to go to a district that's already is in place, is already established, to see how it's working so they can speak with some administrators, some teachers, et cetera, to really build that buy-in. But I would definitely start with coalition.
I would agree with these guys. I would also add, think proactively about the data that you're going to want and need, and set up that system on the front end, and don't try to build it as you go. It's not the most glamorous piece, but it will make things infinitely easier to continue to make your case if you've got a strong data system.
With the target population.
Yeah, in the back over here.
Hi. I'm curious, as you look at sustaining high-quality tutoring, with the teacher shortages and everything else at play as well, what role do you see good technology playing? What would your ideal technology systems be doing for you?
That's a good question with technology. We're a one-to-one district right now, and so when you identify software programs that can be utilized to support student learning and enhance student learning, programs that are interactive, that are fun. We are already school district, for example, so many of the teachers are charting personalized learning plans for students to help them practice and reiterate and reinforce skills that are being taught. So technology usage is very important. We just had a session with how AI can support tutoring, and I think we should continue to collaborate and network and see how all of those various components come into play to support learning. And I'll give you another example. This year was the first year we went to computer-based testing in New York State. Our district went 3 through 5 on the computer, and my first reaction was, well, that is going to really put a damper in some of the progress we've made over the last few years. Ironically, though, the students, this is their way of learning through the Chromebook, through technology. So it was received well, which means they were prepared for it also. But I would try to stay ahead of it and try to utilize and become more familiar with as many technology tools as possible to enhance your program.
I would just add that when you think about access, we moved to one-to-one as well. And that was one of the great things that came from ESSER for us, was going one-to-one and having access to a program like Zern. You have that time in the school day, but then the student can go home and now has access to get on a platform to continue advancing their studies. We're still looking for programs that are beneficial, maybe help us with the shortage in teachers or the shortage in tutors. But I think when I think about technology, I think about access for the kids in our district.
Well, I think we are at time, so join me in thanking our wonderful panel.
Thank you. Thank you.